Hello and welcome to Future Food. I'm Analisa Winther, your host and an ecosystem developer working on food system transformation. All of the work I do centers around facilitating collaborations that unlock innovation and lead to food system transformation. I do this by working with corporate innovation divisions and consulting investors who want to connect with the global startup ecosystem, as well as coaching executives, founders, and visionary leaders who are building this future food system day by day. I also speak on global stages, delivering keynotes on what the future food revolution is going to look like, what it means to be a visionary leader, and how to fundraise from aligned investors that really match your vision and values for the future so that you surround yourself with the right people to bring your desire, your company, your idea into being. I truly believe, and I've been in this game for quite some time now, that our future food system will be built on collaboration and regenerative business models that mimic how natural systems work. And in creating that future, each and every single one of us has a valuable role to play. Everyone eats, no one is excluded from creating our future food system. So, on this podcast, we explore different visions for our future food system, as well as the challenges of building this new paradigm and really entering into it, and what the new models for collaboration and how we can do business are going to be. It's really about coming into right relationship with one another so that we can unlock change. You will be hearing in depth interviews with leaders and organizations who are building a better future through food and really embodying new ways of thinking, doing business, and showing up that honors people and the planet, as well as mini-sodes that explore what it means to be a leader working on food system transformation. Our industry is so unique compared to so many others because we work with the natural world, and that operates on a very different time scale and at a very different pace. So the resiliency and the mindset required is different. It takes something different to be a visionary leader in this space. We also discuss what it means to build strong company cultures that are really anchored in values and a clear vision for the future, as well as our zones of genius. This is so important as leaders, one, to make sure that we don't burn out, but that we consistently keep our motivation and keep building into change. But also, when you know what your organization's zone of genius is, it becomes so much easier to enter into collaborations with other companies because you know your strengths and then you can fill in the gaps with whatever your weaknesses are. We'll also look at how we can harness diversity to unlock innovation and facilitate collaboration between uncommon partners. If you were to look at the natural world and study ecosystems, you would see that the point where two ecosystems meet is where the most life exists. When we really play at those edges, when we bring people together who do not normally interact, and this is something I love doing as an MC, as a speaker, as a coach, a facilitator, we see magic unfold. It's all about getting the right people in the room and having the right conversations so that we can enter into those collaborations and achieve things that we never thought were possible. So, innovation theory tells us that you don't change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, we have to build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And by listening to this show, you will find and engage with a tribe of people who are working to create this paradigm shift. And if anyone's story resonates with you, please feel free to reach out to them. I created this show so that we could facilitate more connections across global innovation hotspots working on the future of food. And no matter who you are more than welcome to get in touch. Every guest's contact information is located in the episode transcripts, which you can find in the show notes. And my suggestion is that you follow your gut, follow your intuition, make the first move, write that first email. You never know where it will lead. Lastly, if you're interested in working with me, if you're looking for an executive leadership coach, a speaker for your next event, or just curious to learn more about my consulting services for investors and corporate innovation divisions, please check out analisawinther.com to see what my offerings are, or just go ahead and book a call with me. I would love to connect with you and learn more about what you're doing and how you're working on food system transformation as well. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into today's episode. This week's guest is Paul Grieve, a regenerative farmer, entrepreneur, investor, and the founder of Pasturebird, the world's largest pasture-raised poultry producer. Paul's team invented the automated range coop, which autonomously moves flocks of 6,000 1,000 broiler chickens to fresh pasture daily using 100% solar power. And they built one of the fastest growing brands in American retail meat. In addition to exploring the world of large scale regenerative ag tech, Paul is studying silvopasture and the combination of plants, trees, and animals in symbiosis. He lives in farms in Southern California as well as in Georgia. And today we're going to be discussing Pasturebird's startup journey, how they collaborated with Purdue to scale, having one of the largest exits in regenerative agriculture to date, as well as how they really grew this family business into an empire that continues to grow with huge ambitions to scale regenerative agriculture and pasture raised poultry in America and beyond. And good news for listeners based in the United States, Paul and his team have generally extended a discount code so that you can try Pasturebird. If you would like access to that, go ahead and sign up for the newsletter. Click on the interview with him, and you'll be able to see that as well as the episode transcript that includes his contact information and how to get in touch in case anything comes up for you, any ideas for how you want to collaborate, work together, questions, whatever it might be. So, with that, let's jump into today's episode. Hello, Paul. Welcome to Future Food. It is such a pleasure to have you here. I would love to start with your backstory because your life is all about chickens. And if anyone is watching the video, they can literally see a feed of your chickens in the background running around. But your backstory started super different from going to Concordia University and then going to sniper school, Iraq, the Marines. I know you've also done a ton of athletics. So, how did you end up with chickens? That seems like an unlikely path.
Chickens and children, that's like my life these days. If you go through my phone, it's just a bunch of chickens and kids.
Only C words allowed in the iPhone or whatever phone you
Yeah.
have.
It is a weird story because I didn't come up as any kind of traditional ag family. I was from the city kid from downtown Seattle, like no interest in food or farming, wasn't opposed to it, just didn't think about it. Definitely grew up like a McDonald's kid that just ate normal American stuff. And it wasn't until I got into the Marine Corps, kind of athlete my whole life, got into the Marine Corps, feeling strong, 22, fit, athlete. And when I went into sniper school, I caught Lyme disease from a tick bite. And that was like the first time in my life I'd ever felt not 100%. And I started getting all this weird brain fog and fatigue and arthritis and like just bad memory, not sharp. And some buddies right around that time said, "Hey, there's this new thing in the military called like paleo, and people are eating this low inflammation diet. You should try it." And I was like, "Well, I got nothing to lose. You know, I like meat and I like vegetables and fruit." So I basically tried switching up my diet, and I felt so different. And it just started me on this crazy journey of like food actually can be medicine, and the story kind of goes on from there. But that was really like the genesis was some health problems.
Yeah. And when I was reading up on your background and history, I was quite surprised to also see that you were like a power fast walker and had a very short stint doing
Oh, you did
that. I
some
was
deep
like,
research. Good for you. Okay. So I was a track athlete in college after playing baseball my whole life. And the sport is actually called race walking. Some of your European listeners will be more familiar, but in the US, it's like not much of a sport. So the sport was dying. And the head of US race walking came out to one of our track meets and he said, "Hey, any of you guys interested in learning how to do race walking?" And I did it as a complete joke with my track buddies. It's like, oh, that'd be really funny to go out and just mess around, you know? And then my wife always makes fun of me because the first day, like, I mean, I'm okay at sports or whatever, but the first day, the guy pulls me aside. He's like, "You've got some of the best natural race walking talent I've ever seen." I was like, "Oh, thank you, God, for making
you're
me good
like,
at like the weirdest sport in the world, you know, like a natural race walker."
it's like, who's punking me right now?
Yeah.
What's going on? I
It
don't
was actually really
understand.
fun. At one point, I had to decide if I wanted to go into the Marine Corps or join Team USA on the race walking squad. So that was a very odd decision point in my life.
Yeah. One of those sliding door moments, right? Where you're clearly able to be like, wow, what would my journey have been if I went that way?
You don't
Core.
expect those things, you know. It was like 5 years before that. If you would have said Marine Corps was weird. Again, growing up in Seattle, like not a huge interest in military stuff. I did have military on one side of my family, like my grandfather, but never really thought of it as my career path. I studied accounting in undergrad, and the normal career path would be to go right into like cubicle life, you know. But at 22, athlete my whole life, the idea of like staring down the gun of cubicle at 22 years old felt really odd. And I just started praying about it a lot. And I was meeting with mentors, and it was this. I think it was like a God thing, but it was this really interesting thing. All within about the course of a week, I had three different people that I really trusted all say, "Hey, have you thought about, serving your country or doing something like kind of military or Peace Corps or just traveling? Like, why don't you do something other than settling down into a career at 22?" And it just kept like popping up over and over, military, military. And the more I thought about it, I just started going down that road. And I was like, hey, God can shut any door he wants. And like, the opportunity won't be there. But a few months later, I found myself like shipping off to Virginia and doing the intelligence officer thing. And then I deployed in 2009 to Iraq for Operation Iraqi Freedom. Was not a traditional deployment. It was a really eye-opening, like cultural experience for me. I was able to live with about 50 Iraqis, had every meal with them, shared, hours and hours and hours every day, like deeply kind of embedded into their culture. And for
Mm.
me, it was like half field trip, half, serving in like a combat area, because I got to develop these really deep, like personal friendships and relationships with Iraqi people that wouldn't have otherwise had the opportunity to leave their country or anything like that. And I got to experience their food, kind of how they think about the world. I got to learn the language, and it was just like a really, really cool cultural experience for me. And then my whole team came back safe and sound and in one piece. So it was
Yeah.
really, it was a cool experience.
And when you look back now, feeling like that was a sign from God to take that path and not be on the US Olympic race walking team, for example, what do you think that experience taught you? How has that played into your story now and helped you to get to where you are today?
Maybe it sounds cliche, but like I do feel like windows are opened in unusual places sometimes. And a lot of my friends that have found not financial success, but like success in the terms of leaving the world better than you found it. It often comes in these like weird kind of random opportunities. And so for me to think about going into the military, not really having considered that, or go into chicken farming later on, it was almost like, well, the door's open. I'll go through it until it closes. And it seems as if these things just kind of continued to open. And there's a few examples in my life where things like didn't open like that. I tried them, and low risk, but like you try something, it doesn't really work and you move on to the next thing. But that's definitely how the military was for me. Ended up having this amazing experience, meeting some really great people, tested my wife and I, like the two things she said, like, I'll never marry anybody in the military and I'll never move back to Temecula, which is where we ended up starting our first farm, both of which have been like since debunked, but I think it humbled us and also gave us a sense of service, which I believe regenerative ag really is one of the
Yes.
most patriotic things that you can do for whatever country you're in, probably even on par with military service or anything like that. Like that's truly giving back to your country and building the soil. So that sense of service, I think, is innate to a lot of farmers.
Can you elaborate on that? Because that, I know in many of the farmers I've met, there is a huge sense of spirituality in what they do. And there is a deep sense of service and purpose and community. So, how would you draw that parallel, or what do you experience? You've been in the game for quite some time now as well.
Yeah, I mean, we used to write these like Fourth of July emails, and we'd say like, oh, the most patriotic thing you can do isn't like, drink beers and barbecue. It's like buy regenerative beef. I mean, at the end of the day, our indigenous people that came before us in this land really thought about the soil that they passed on to the next generation as the great inheritance. It wasn't money or anything else. It was like, let's pass on, like, you know, let's pass on great soil that they can use for their kids and their great grandkids. And one of my favorite quotes is just about like the soil, it's not actually ours. It's like on loan from our grandchildren, and that's an old indigenous quote. It's like, I don't know. I think we fall into the trap of thinking very single generation in our country. And I do think
Yeah.
there's this element of patriotism that's like not just about carbon sequestration and data and nutrient density, all those things are great, but thinking beyond our own generation and even into our grandkids' generation can be really hard to do from an American context because we're so on the go and in the moment. And I love America, but I think that that's one of our downfalls is just like very in the moment. And I think
Mhm.
patriotism has a lot to do with like building out for the next generation or multi generations down the road.
Yeah. And I love the sentiment that comes with fighting for your country in this context. of you are fighting for a better tomorrow, fighting for the future. And that also comes in fighting the weeds or doing something else. It
Totally.
doesn't have to be literally being in battle, but just being aware of what is the intention we're setting and moving towards, and how are we creating and leaving that legacy. And we're all a part of it. I also love what you said with your wife of never say never, because my mom is always saying the same. She's like, I never would move to New Jersey, and here she is. So never say never. You'll end
Be
up getting that
careful.
exact thing. So you went to Iraq, you got Lyme disease, and if I'm right, you also had arthritis and you went into paleo. One of the things I find so interesting about your story is that you felt a need in the market and then you actually created the solution for your need. And I'd love to just talk about that germination process of really being like, I need to fulfill this. Like somebody's got to step up. Someone's got to do this. This just doesn't exist where I live. What can I create from here? Can you take us back to that point and what was going on?
So it's always funny because it's true what you're saying, but it sounds a lot more linear when you say it than the way it really happens in real life, Like it wasn't planned, it wasn't that intentional. We were sitting around Easter of 2012. We have a big family out here in Temecula, which is kind of north of San Diego, south of Los Angeles, in Southern California, but a more rural pocket of Southern California. And we were just joking around, basically like, man, we'd all now gone on this health journey. We're spending tons of money on trying to buy organic fruits and vegetables, local, grass-fed beef, and we got interested in this guy Joel Salatin that's based in Virginia that was doing pasture-raised chicken, and we were like, well, it feels like we can find everything except for pasture-raised chicken, and so we were like, well, wouldn't it be funny if we got 50 chickens for the backyard? And we were just sort of joking around, big haha. My brother-in-law Rob, who's now my business partner, sort of like disappeared from the room, comes back about 10 minutes later, and he goes, hey guys, I just ordered those 50 chickens you guys wanted me to order. Like, and we all go, what are you talking about? Like, nobody was saying that you should go do that. But lo and behold, I mean, they showed up 2 weeks later. They're here. Like, we're reading Joel Salatin's work. We're watching YouTube. We're like figuring it out. 8 weeks goes by. We now have like 50 birds like this that need to be harvested. And we got to go, basically watch YouTube and figure that out. In the meantime, about halfway in, like none of us really came from money. We didn't have a lot of like capital to put into the business. It was just a hobby and nobody wanted to spend a bunch of money on it. So I started seeing all these costs rack up, feed and equipment and all these different things. And so I was like, well, this is back in the day when Facebook was more popular than it is now, I guess. But I put some things up on Facebook and said, hey, if any friends or family want to try any of these pasture raised chickens, we have 50 of them. We can sell a few. Sure enough, like all 50 end up selling out in the course of about 2 weeks. And so we're now sitting on, $2,500. And it's like, whoa, that went faster than I thought. And I'm now studying for my MBA up at UCLA. And it's like, I know how to run numbers and that has a margin on it. Like, I wonder if that's more than just a little hobby. So everybody loved them. My family was all ticked off at me because I sold all the chickens and like we didn't have any now. So the next month we did 100 and kind of like similar thing happened. We ended up with a couple hundred families on a waiting list and then enjoyed it and just felt like deeply connected to the process. And we thought it was really cool. As a city kid, I'd always heard that like the best thing that you could do for the environment would be to eat less meat. Yet I'm sitting here watching these mobile chickens fertilize the land. I see the land popping up so green and lush and verdant, like right behind where the chickens are. And I see what Joel Salatin's saying about actually if animals are raised in the right way, how good they can be for the environment. And my mind was blown. It was like, I'm thinking about this in a totally different way than I ever had before. And this little tiny baby business was essentially born in my in-laws' backyard.
Wow. Just before we go further, can you explain what pasture raised means and how that fits into regenerative agriculture? So maybe start by just sharing what is regenerative agriculture and how does pasture raised fit into that?
Yeah, I mean, regenerative's got a million definitions. Everybody gets hung up on all this stuff. Like, to me, it's just, did you leave it better or not? You could go in a lot of the science of like, what is better? Well, I don't know. I don't think you need to be a rocket science to look at the land. And traditionally, farmers would always say like good farming just means you left the soil in a good, healthy condition. We would say, did you leave it better than kind of how you came into it? You can measure that on organic matter or water holding capacity or biodiversity or all these different things. But in its simplest form, did you leave the land better than you found it? The way that pastured poultry plays into that is pastured poultry is supposed to mean what we mean when we say it, not everybody, is that the birds are actually raised on pasture 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you can see the screen behind me, you can kind of imagine a bunch of chickens grazing in one spot. Well, the problem is if they stay there for too long, they're going to eat all the grass. They're not going to be on pasture anymore. So pasture raised inherently assumes that these birds are like moving around to a new place really, really often so that they're on fresh grass and their manure becomes fertilizer kind of for the next time around. And so you'll have this high intensity grazing, long rest period. By the time you come back, that grass is fully recovered and absorbed the nutrients from the manure. But that's really that idea of pasture raised. Now, what it means today, I mean, you've got lots of companies scamming the term pasture raised in stationary, kind of industrial warehouse style facilities with outdoor access where the birds like don't actually really go outside all that much. And they'll call that pasture raised. Really, to me, that's completely misleading and it's greenwashing. But to us and about like 900 other farmers across the US and across the rest of the world, pasture raised is what it means. Like the birds were raised on pasture, which inherently implies moving them around the field.
I think it's good to draw context here that we are going to be talking about two businesses at once. So one is Primal Pastures, which is a chicken raising operation that is stewarded by your family at this point. And then you started Pasturebird, which is the video that's behind you, which is the automated chicken coop you've created. So
Mm-hmm.
those are two separate things. And I just want to make it clear because throughout this conversation, we won't always be talking about you deliberately raising the chickens. It's also how do we do it at scale.
Yeah, it can be confusing because they both have the word pasture in them. Pasture is obviously super important to my family. It's like the baseline of it. Primal, think of Primal as the family business that's multi-species, kind of e-commerce based. And think of Pasturebird as the one that we wanted to grow something nationally and big, and we brought in investment. We sold it to one of the big ag guys, which I'm sure we'll get into. But yeah, two different awesome businesses with two different awesome missions. It's just they didn't share the exact same mission, so we split them up.
Yeah. And just going back to like what is pasture raised? What are we talking about? What would you desire it to be? Because it's true that the standard isn't the same across the board. It's something that is being worked on in many different
Yeah.
places around the world. So when you think of pasture raised within this regenerative system, is it that it's always working with other animals? Are pesticides and fertilizers allowed within this system? Like how do you see just the future of pasture raised and what goes into that?
Yeah, I like the idea that like pasture raised shouldn't become an animal welfare standard. It shouldn't become an ecology standard. Like it should be really simple. Were the animals living on pasture for the majority of their life or not? Because you have to remember too, chickens, when they're little tiny baby chicks, they can't be on pasture yet. So they need to be inside of like a controlled environment that we call a brooder, where they can be kept at 80, 90 degrees until they feather out. Then they can be outside for the majority of their life. But I like to keep it really simple. Like regenerative means you left the land better than you found it. Pasture raised means those animals were actually living on pasture, not access. Access is like we call it the dirty word or the A word in our industry because it sounds really good. Access to 108 square feet of pasture. Well, chickens are prey animals. They want to be close to their food, water, and shade. They want to be close to their friends. Like they're not just wandering out into a big open field. It's just not part of their biology. It's not a natural chicken behavior. So you could give a chicken access to, hundreds and hundreds of acres. They're not actually going to use it unless you're forcing them to go outside. And that's why Joel Salatin and a lot of farmers have really come back to this idea that like chickens should be in these mobile enclosures where they're essentially in a shade structure, like an easy up, and they can be moved around every day. So you're really moving their impact around the field. And that's going to give you the regenerative like outcomes that you want to.
And then, of course, what they're eating is either the insects, the grass, I'm not some form of grain, right? What, in terms of the quality of that, what do you see as the standard? Because I think most farmers would never say, I'm going to be 100% without pesticides or fertilizers. I mean, chemical pesticides and fertilizers versus organic. But do you see a standard there? Or what do you imagine as the future within the system?
There's lots of room for pasture raised farmers. We've got some guys that do certified organic, corn free, and soy free. Like that's what Primal Pastures does. I would call that the gold standard. Pasturebird took a more like accessible, affordable route. So they do the non GMO, corn and soybean, peanut and wheat. And of course, these things are all in addition to that rich, lush, diverse grasses, bugs, seeds, worms, flowers, weeds. We like to say like chickens were never meant to be vegetarian. So whoever came up with that crazy marketing thing, like, no, our chickens are not vegetarians. We want them eating as many bugs and worms as they can possibly find when they're out there in the field. But it comes back to that supplemental feed that you're going to give them. And then also, of course, you could be pasture raised and still use antibiotics, in my opinion. We don't do that with any of our companies. We're not really interested in that. It's more about prophylactic, preventative health from fresh air and movement, sunshine, good clean water, and vitamin D. And like the birds don't get sick because they're in a good, healthy environment. But in my opinion, you could still raise a bird that lives on pasture and administer antibiotics, and it could still be considered pasture raised. It just wouldn't be antibiotic free. To that note, I also don't think there's anything wrong with free range. Free range just means the birds had access to go outside. No questions asked. That's better than not having access to go outside, right? So
Yeah.
even if they don't use it that much or they're only outside for 3 or 5% of their life, still light years ahead of being locked inside of cramped
Cages.
like warehouse for its whole life. So there's all these different shades of gray, and like pasture raised, I would say, is currently probably the gold standard as far as animals are like on grass, really living that differentiated kind of lifestyle. But that doesn't mean it's the only way that things should ever be done. I just really believe in transparency. Back to the consumer, be honest with them, tell them what you're really doing, and let them decide how they want to spend their money. I just don't like when people are faking it.
I think we can all agree there. So going back in time, your brother-in-law orders these chicks. Suddenly you've got all these chickens. You sell them, and I know that a core part of the business is that you slaughter them as well. And I just have to ask how you got your whole family on board, because the first time you did it, like everyone had to help. And I'm trying to imagine my family doing this. And I know that you taught yourselves on YouTube. So I'm like, how did you get the whole family bought in? Did you share these values? What happened to actually make that go? Because I know it's a huge problem in many places. We don't have the slaughtering facilities or the know-how anymore to really like even just do this in local communities.
It's the problem. I mean, that's what holds back. That's why there's 900 pasture poultry farms in the US instead of 9,000. It's all around processing. And what I'll share with you is like, we do not have a rugged farm family. Like my wife's a really high end interior designer, does beautiful work. So we had to trick everybody. So we just basically started tricking people that, oh yeah, you don't have to really do the processing part. You're just going to do the part where you bag the chickens or, we had to like basically fool people into it. And then once they got sick of it after a couple times, we started tricking our friends like, hey, you want to come over for a barbecue? Yeah, we just have this little thing we need your help with. And then pretty soon your friends are like, I don't want to hang out with you anymore. Like, I know what we're going to be doing. So then hopefully you get to where you can start paying people to help you or whatever. But that's the hardest part. I always say like one of my favorite days of farming ever was the day we got big enough and we had enough chickens to bring them to the USDA processor, which thank God we had one in Los Angeles, like not too far where we could bring them to and we could be USDA certified. That way we can sell to restaurants and grocery stores and stuff as well, which is really cool. But backyard processing, first 10,000 birds, my family did them all by hand in the backyard with primitive equipment, low budget. I look back on those days really fondly, but like it was not for the faint of heart. It was hard work.
Yeah, and I know you use the whole bird as well, which is pretty already at that point impressive, and just I give you a lot of respect and kudos. I don't even know where I would begin if I were to
It's one of
take
those
that
ones where
on.
if you had to do it again, you wouldn't do it. It's like one of those things. I'm glad we did. It got us to where we are, but like I would not sign up for that again. It's no joke. Some people really love it. Some people are a lot more rugged than our family is, and they really like to be in the details and doing their own processing. And I think that's really beautiful. And like for your listeners, depending on where they are in the world, I mean, I would encourage you to find somebody that's doing backyard processing because that's a lot of times where that deep, real food is happening is
Yeah.
not actually through the USDA plants and everything else. So there's something about, sanitation versus cleanliness and bacteria growth. And like, I believe outdoor processing in the open nature where you're not required to use, some of these chemicals and things like that in the processing, probably like really amazing. It's just as you start to scale, it's not possible anymore. And local county restrictions, I mean, 25,000 birds total per year in California. Once you go over that, you have to be USDA. If you ever want to sell into a restaurant, a grocery store, you have to be USDA. If you want to sell boneless, skinless breast or drumsticks, like any parts other than the whole bird, you also have to be USDA in California. Different every state, every country. But scalability is really hard with backyard processing.
Yeah. Since you've gotten started, do you find more people are reaching out to you wanting to get started and do backyard processing and all this stuff? Like you feel there's this growing grassroots movement in addition to the top down?
Part of me like wants to get back to backyard processing. I'm like a government skeptic kind of person just naturally, and sometimes I think, man, we may have gone too far with this whole USDA and all that, but it's a part of our business. It's just a reality. On the Primal Pastures home farm, there is a good amount of like backyard style, not so much chickens, but with the beef cattle and the pigs and sheep and different things like that. There's more of that backyard sort of like environment to it that I think is really cool and really resilient. If plants are burning down and all these weird things are kind of happening, like it feels very resilient to have your own in-house processing. But again, it's a matter of scale. I mean, Pasturebird is in retail nationwide, and that would just absolutely not be possible to do at the scale that we're at.
Okay, so let's then talk a little bit about how Primal Pastures grew into Pasturebird. Can you just catch us up with that timeline, that story of how one moved into the other? So we have that piece.
Yeah, because like I said, we didn't grow up with a lot of money. Like none of us did. So I married in. It's my wife's family. We all sort of started this thing at the same time together in 2012. We started raising birds, and it went really well. We started out with you got to come to the farm and pick it up. We're like, all right, how do we make this more convenient for people? So we started doing drop sites. Everybody loved it. I mean, we are starting to get like a real small business. In 2013, my wife and I both kind of left the beach, really cool lifestyle. I was working as an accountant. She was still doing her interior design stuff. Moved in with her parents, just like started reinvesting all the money back into the business, started grinding. Her brother and sister moved in with us as well. And everybody just started pouring into the business. And it was like really, really cool. But we got to the point a couple years into the business where it's like, it feels weird selling $40 whole chicken. None of us could have afforded that growing up. Is it cool? Yeah, like the organic and soy free and corn free and pasture is like it's amazing food that we're producing, but in a weird way, it can start to feel like you're producing food for rich people, or at least producing food that your parents wouldn't have been able to afford growing up. And so we started thinking like it's amazing. Love the mission of Primal. It's really about producing the gold standard for mixed proteins and beef, lamb, chicken, pork, wild fish, like raw honey, all these really, really cool things. But then we started thinking like regenerative ag is so near and dear to our heart, nutrient dense foods so near and dear to our heart. Would there be a way to take the principles from like the little 80 bird system in our backyard and essentially supersize them, bring in economies of scale, and be able to bring something that's almost that same quality that's like farmers market or farmers direct into large scale retail and have bigger regenerative impacts on more acreage too? Because one of the things is it's awesome to regenerate 5 acres, but these systems scale in a linear fashion. So it's like if I have
Mm.
more birds, I can affect more acreage. And if I start being able to take down 200, 500, 1,000 acres at a time and regenerate, the interesting thing is now I can start to actually regenerate those same cornfields and soybean fields that I need to buy feed from. And we can start to actually close that loop because it's one of the weird things in the monogastric animals, which is like your chickens and your pigs. They all need these off farm inputs of corn, soybeans, whatever, millet, peas, whatever you're going to feed them. And it's like, yeah, we're regenerating this land, but what about all that land where we're buying the feed from? Like, is that regenerative? What's going on there? So the cool thing is, as we get bigger, we can start to integrate more with those grain fields and the row croppers. And to me, that's really the future of food is the animal to plant integration. That's some exciting stuff that's happening now.
We're going to dive more into what that looks like. Before we dive into Pasturebird, how that works and operates, you also had celebrity interest in this, which I think goes back to both food, good food being a bit luxury, but also the idea that it's connected very deeply to health. And that is how many people get into this space. It's one of those pathways, either like a
Yeah.
health driven focus or I just want to spend money on really good food. What that was with Primal Pastures, right? Where it was the Lakers, I believe, that came to you and they helped to launch what you were doing.
Yeah, you're good at your research. I like it. I like what you got going on. Um, It was really early on. It was like late 2013. We were grinding. We had this 2 acre little backyard, and we get a call from this person who says they're the team chef for the Lakers for the players. And this is back in the day when you had like Kobe Bryant, Steve Nash. I mean, really important NBA players that were really focused on ancestral health and wellness and bone broth and good fats, and like way before everybody else was really talking about it. And we're like, I don't think so. Like I think this is a spam or something. Sure enough, it was Sandra Padilla and Kate Shanahan, and they were like, "Yeah, we'd like to organize a farm tour to come down and see the farm and all this stuff." And we're like, I don't think they realize we're on 2 acres down in Temecula, but let's just have them out anyways. Let's give it a shot. They come out, they kind of like fall in love with all the stuff that we're doing, and they said, "Look, we spend millions of dollars on these players. The least we should be doing is like giving them the best food that we can buy. So there is no price tag that's too much for us. Like just sell us the best stuff that you can for our players." And that turned into a really cool relationship that spawned into also feeding the Dodgers players because their chefs communicate a lot, and they're like, "Wait, the Lakers are doing this, we need to do it too." So we were able to feed those teams and visit their facilities and like meet some of the players. And for a bunch of sports guys like us from Southern California, that was just a really cool experience. Not so much like revenue. I mean, it was great, but it was more like this really cool boost of confidence early in the business that like what we're doing is seen and it's valued by people who have to take seriously their health and longevity. I mean, it's the difference of tens of millions of dollars to be able to play an extra year.
Yeah.
So it was really cool to be able to like have the confidence that comes from working with those guys.
And it's influence, right? It's so important when we bring more influence into this space and what that opens up for many people and just raising their awareness and being aware that this
Mm-hmm.
is a thing. That's a thing they
Totally.
do. So going back to Pasturebird, you realize there's an opportunity to scale what you're doing. You've heard from Joe Salatone the idea of these coops, and I believe you build your first coop on your own and realize, okay, this is not going to work if we really want to get things going. Can you talk to us about the invention process of getting to where we are today? And again, I encourage listeners to look at the video behind Paul where you can really see like what the coop looks like. And I'm going to link to a YouTube video where you can see the whole thing in action and get like the big picture of the farm.
Nice.
But tell us about the invention moment of like where this came from and how you started building it and growing it and scaling it.
The traditional Salatin coop is a 10 foot by 12 foot wooden structure that has no floor on it, and it has a pull handle. So every morning, think of like walking out, you got 80 birds inside of each kind of coop. You're going to pull that to a full new spot. So like one full length so that they're on all fresh new pasture. And then you're going to reach in, you're going to grab out the feed and grab out the water, replenish those, and then put them back in. That process takes maybe like 15 minutes or so per coop. And so you're going to go do that for every 80 birds that you have. Our big, what we thought was so cool is like, all right, let's instead of making these out of wood, let's make it a metal, which would allow us to put them on wheels. And we'll build 50,000 of these things. And so we went out, and one of the things for us was just like, we did not see an exit plan for the family farm. It didn't make sense for us to try to raise money because how are we going to give people their money back? All of our network was these angels and VCs, and it was like they're all on a 5 year, max 10 year time horizon to make their 10x return. And it was like the family farm's not going to give you that. But this kind of new invention, new way of raising birds, like that totally could. So we split the two companies. We started inventing the idea of the automated coop, and this was one that we could push with a little tractor, and we would take that timeline from like 15 minutes down to 5 minutes, and we would just build thousands and thousands of these things. Well, we got about raised our first round, like a little seed round with a local angel group, built out maybe our first 50 of those. And very quickly we were like, this is so dumb. Like we should build bigger coops. The problem with a small coop is you're amortizing all that cost over only 80 birds. So I can't invest in any automation or any equipment or like really anything because it's such a small number of birds that I have to take it over. So the next iteration, we moved up to a 600 bird coop. That was really a picture like a greenhouse that's on skids. So now I could pull up with a tractor, I could hook up to that rope, I could pull 600 birds forward, and that would take like 5 minutes. I would go through manually kind of replace the feed, but now I had an automated water line. So instead of like having to dump out water and replenish it, I could just plug it into a hose bib, and that water would all be done. So instead of 80 birds in 10 minutes, now I'm down to like 600 birds in 10 minutes. Felt really good about that. Again, built about 70 of those. We were like, this is it. We're going to build thousands and thousands of these. We did not really a Series A, just like a seed round plus to help finance that because, no independent wealth here. Then the real light bulb moment kind of happened when we were like, coming up in the world of like natural food and regen ag, there's a lot of just, I'll call it hatred or mistrust towards big ag. And it's almost this idea that like everything they do is evil and bad and terrible. And we can't learn anything from them because they're horrible. But we had the chance to really spend some time with some of those farms and thinking about those systems. And it was like, hold on a second. You've got, I don't care what you think, a lot of really smart people thinking about the most efficient ways to raise meat chickens that there are. And again, sorry, we do meat chickens, not really eggs. We can talk more about that later. But you got a lot of really smart people spending a lot of time and energy how to most efficiently raise meat chickens. Is there anything from their process that we could apply? And that was the big unlock for us. It was like, let's stop being egotistical and dumb about this. Like, is there anything that they're doing really awesome that we could leverage? And it was like, well, I don't think the chickens benefit from us manually dumping feed into their feeders one by one. The industry, the big industry, has figured out how to automate all of that feeding. So they'll put feed into a silo. There's electric motors that drive that feed all the way down to the end of the house. And they'll feed 24,000 birds with zero human intervention at all. Well, guess what? Those birds could care less if there's a human dropping that feed off or if it's an auger dropping that feed off. So that was one huge one. Climate control. We had no means to automate our climate control. So when it got hot, we were walking around to all 77 of those coops, rolling up windows or rolling down windows. We had no power or electricity to put any kind of fans or like, cooling things down or warming things up when the seasons weren't quite right. Well, guess what? In the industry, they have a full grid connected situation. So they've got heat, they've got cool, they've got thermostatically controlled, windows and side doors and all these different ways to keep the birds kind of at an optimal temperature. The birds benefit from that. Like that's better welfare than what we're able to give them inside of these pasture houses. So there was probably a half dozen things, realizations like that when we're like, oh my gosh, like I think we've been cocky about this. I think we've been egotistical. Like we need to check our pride. And is there spots where we could actually incorporate some of the great work that's been done on the conventional side, but still put it inside of this house that actually moves and combine the benefits from these little 600 bird systems, and then the 25,000 bird systems that the industry uses. And we started really like inventing and iterating. We hired one of the best guys in the world to help us with this process. We ended up taking some money from a guy who was connected to a couple of guys that were connected to NASA. We got hooked up with the Jet Propulsion Labs team, and they were like, "This is actually not that different than trying to make a vehicle walk on a foreign kind of planet or a moon." And it was like, think
Wow.
about this. So now we're going to try to figure out in the industry what fits on a semi truck is 6,000 birds at a time. So we're like, all right, that's the number we got to solve for. Like, we want to make it so that it fits into the conventional sort of industry standard. So, all right, 6,000 birds, we do all the math. We want the same stocking density. We want the same manure load, the same rest time as we had when we were 80 birds and when we were 600 birds. So that number spits out 7,500 square feet. Well, now you got to figure out, you could build a house that's 7,500 square feet, but how do you get it to move on a farm field that's undulating terrain, that's super wet sometimes, super dry other times? You can't run a power cord out to the middle of 500 acres. Like you're going to have to generate your own power, which means either diesel motors or for us, we thought, well, why there's a great application for solar. Let's just generate our own power way out in the middle of the field. And then autonomous movement came really important to us because again, we want to reduce human intervention, non-necessary human intervention as much as possible. And so we need to figure out how to make these coops actually drive themselves instead of having us sit there and pull them with a tractor or have to do something by hand or whatever. It's not even possible at that size. So developed a system with 26 electric drive motors and solar power, and it was about a 4-year process. It was honestly like a awesome adventure. My job was to keep the bills paid and to raise the money to allow the really really smart guys to do their thing. And I'll never forget the first day that I got a video sent to me of this gigantic structure like driving itself on the field. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is it, you know? And we've been
Wow.
really just iterating since.
Quite the engineering feat when you hear it like that. Like, holy moly. Just to clarify, when you say we, was this your family that also went into this business? Who else was essential in this? How big was your team in developing it? It sounds like you brought in a lot of engineering talent. I'm just curious what that looked like and who was with you up until the point then that Purdue comes in, and we'll get into that because I'm sure it's different now. But
Yeah, my family's got a lot of strengths. Engineering's not one of them. We recognized really early on that, like, if
good to know
honestly, it's a
your
huge lesson
strengths.
for us. Yeah, it's like know what you're good at, know what you got to find some help on. And I think right away it was like none of us are going to figure out how to build this thing. We can figure out how to sell the chickens. I can figure out how to finance it. I can figure out a lot of good things, how to market it and staff it. But building the actual thing is like not in my family's wheelhouse at all. Started building out the team like slowly but surely, but we made a key hire in 2018, a guy that had spent a lot of time in pasture poultry already, but he was also an engineer, kind of scientist by trade, and really just ready to take on the challenge. And that was a fun conversation because he was traveling around. He came out to our farm and we were sharing some of our dreams about what do we think is possible here. The hard thing is the biggest pasture poultry company was doing about 3,000 or 4,000 chickens a week. Sounds like a lot, but it's absolutely tiny compared to the industry. The
Hmm.
smallest sort of national player that's doing broilers, like free range or organic or anything like that, is doing about 1 million birds a week. And so
Wow.
we started going, there's got to be an in between here. Like there's got to be room for somebody to do pasture at much larger scale than what's happening right now. We both shared this vision for like 1 million chickens a week, raised on pasture, regenerating 10,000 acres of farmland every year. And he was like, that's my number two. I think we can do it. I've got some real concrete ideas on how. We had different ideas on how to get there, but it was really just this cool partnership and then bringing in some of the outside engineering talent, and it was all about getting the right people onto the bus. You know, it's a solvable problem, not easy, but it's like solvable, and then getting the business capitalized to where we can do that kind of stuff. A lot of farmers are so cash strapped. It's like you could have the best idea ever, but you can't spend 300, $400,000 on this idea of a chicken coop. Like, how's that ever going to work? You know? And then some of the
Exactly. So
patents and like building out the patent portfolio to make it investable and kind of acquirable as well. That was important too.
one of the key things I work with my coaching clients on, many of whom are founders, visionary leaders, executives who are having a strong vision for the future of food and what they know to be possible, we talk often about the importance of the vision and values in attracting those right people. The team in
Mm,
the beginning, when you have little to offer other than the idea, the investors who are investing in that future, the loved ones around you who need to be there supporting you and believing that what
100%.
you're doing is worth the time and energy. Would you be able to talk a little bit about the vision and the values you push and what you found important and bringing those right people around it to move this forward?
You're probably, yeah, I mean, you probably have a high value as a consultant because the things that you hit on are all the really important things. I mean, everybody forgets about how important it is to keep your family life together and social life kind of together through that process. All of it's so important. We did. We had I feel blessed. We had a clear vision on where we were going. It was pretty no frills,
And that
and
was
it wasn't.
a million birds a week for 10,000 acres a year in the beginning. That was the vision.
Yeah, it still is the vision. I mean, that was like almost 10 years ago, and that's still what we're aiming for and what we want to get to someday today. You know, so
Mm,
not much has
okay.
really changed. A really clear commitment to daily move pasture poultry. That was the vector. There's a lot of different things you can do on the breed of the chicken, the feed, the way you're going to market it or package it. Like all that is sort of secondary to we're going to raise birds on grass. We're going to move them every day to a new spot. And it's 1 million birds and 10,000 acres. And like those are the core kind of vision things. And we didn't even talk a lot about regenerative. Like for us, that's the awesome byproduct that we get from this. And I love to walk out to the farm in San Diego or in Georgia. And it's like, it's unbelievable the power of we're chicken and cattle. We raise cattle as well. Otherwise the grass gets too tall. But when you see these animals working in harmony with nature, you take over these degraded croplands and you see what's possible. It's like such a shot in the arm. It gets everybody fired up. It's like this is why, this is why we do it. But it is a byproduct at the end of the day. I mean,
Yeah.
we really believe in nutrient dense, accessible, affordable products that aren't going to be the cheapest, but they're within reach for the everyday family. This doesn't have to be like rich people food. People can get that 3 times omega-3 and extra vitamins and minerals, and like they can get good meat for a price that doesn't break the bank. That's a really fun mission for us, you know?
That's awesome. Can you tell us a little bit more about the business model and how it works, how you make money? Let me know if first we need to talk about bringing in Purdue and what that looked like and where it is now. What would make more sense?
No, we can do the business model first. So
Hmm.
we we quickly got the idea after taking our first round of investment, really cool group called Pasadena Angels out here in Southern California. And they basically did our follow-on round as well. Not big money nowadays, felt like a lot to us back then. But the idea was like, we want to be a poultry company, vertically integrated. Like we want to figure out how to buy our own plant. We want to figure out how to buy our own hatchery, our own feed mill, and build out our own independent chicken company. And very quickly, it became clear that like if we're going to do that, it's probably going to be $200 million capital investment. And I don't really want to run a plant. I don't really want to run a feed mill, and I definitely don't like know how to run a hatchery. So either, your vector can either be like trying to build an independent business, or you could partner with somebody who's already got all those things and let you really focus on what I think we were going to do differently, which was the coop and the actual live side production practices. And so about 2 years in, we were like, forget trying to buy all that crazy stuff and raise enough money for that. Let's stay super lean. Let's sell enough chickens to basically fund our development of the coop and of the IP, intellectual property patents, and the portfolio around kind of how we do things. And then let's figure out a partner that would let us like help us take this to the next level. That'll keep it really lean. It'll allow us to still own a high percentage of the business. It'll allow us like a chance for a much quicker, not that we were looking for an exit, but a much quicker strategic partnership. I just didn't think it was going to be Purdue. Like we were West Coast guys, didn't really know about Purdue. There's a couple West Coast companies out here that we thought would probably make sense. But the business model was always about essentially like let's raise enough chickens and let's sell them at a price that lets us pour money back into this coop and the IP to get us a good strategic partner down the road. So we
Hmm.
were never going for profit. It wasn't for dividend. We wanted to break even and pump all the money from selling the chickens back into what we thought was going to provide value to whoever wanted to partner with us.
Did you have or discuss an exit strategy? Because I find this very important for founders to consider from the beginning because building a company is a lifestyle. So you can be building a company for the rest of your life and be working on this, which is one plan. Another is exiting, another is IPOing. There's a lot of different
Yep.
ways you can go. So was it more like the door opened when Purdue came in and you said, we're going to walk through, or had you already thought, how can we exit in some capacity? How can we move this forward to get to our greater vision? I'm just curious about when these
When
ideas
we
came for
split the
you.
business off in 2015, so Primal is like the first example that you had, which is long-term, family-owned, dividend-based business. I would call it a cash cow. It doesn't make us very much money, but like that's the vision where it would be a long-term dividend business that we keep in the family forever. Um, Pasturebird was like a totally different vision. So if you're going to jump in with angels or VCs, they have to get their money back, typically on a 5-year timeline, and they want 10x. You're not going to do that with a dividend business that takes tons of capital. Like you need to be lean and you need to have some kind of a platform. So for us, um, going into coop development, brand building, and IP development, like that's the kind of business that you can get a 10x back to your investors. And that's why that capital stack made sense for that business. That doesn't mean it makes sense for like all regen ag businesses. I see a lot of people trying to raise equity financing for a business that should be debt structured or profit, like investing your own profits. Like you got to get the right capital stack for the right type of business that you have. It was just for this business, we saw an exit either through private equity if we were to like really build out a bunch of plant and equipment and all this other stuff. But very quickly, it was only 2 years in. By 2017, it was clear that we wanted to stay lean, own a higher percentage of a smaller business, and then try to find a strategic partner and then basically go grow the business with them, So it became less about let's go from 6,000 birds a week to 60,000 birds a week to much more of like, let's keep the business break even. Let's not burn money. Um, but let's like invest everything we can back into the coop and back into the patent portfolio, because that's what's going to be most valuable to a strategic partner, like in the chicken business already.
Yeah. I think you say a few really important nuggets there I just want to highlight. One is, again, knowing your zones of genius, knowing what you're amazing at. If it's not financing, find someone who knows about financing and figure that out from the beginning, because it's going to be so influential for your business and fueling it and how you organize it and what opportunities are available for you later. So, yes, yes, and yes. And then also, to me, what was so brilliant is when you realize like 6,000 is our number. That is what the
Mm-hmm.
existing coops are based on. And when we look at innovation theory, it is always about building a new system that can eclipse the old one. So, to fit with the strategic partner, make it as easy as possible, plug and
Yeah.
play, already setting up for integration, but you had to do your homework and do your own due diligence to figure out what that was. And when you said, too, it's about checking your ego, it's about looking at what are the best principles we can learn from any industry because everyone has something to teach us. And then also saying we can't do this alone. To reach that big vision, we cannot do this alone. We have to collaborate. Who is available? What are uncommon partnerships that we could do? So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about how the collaboration with Purdue came to be. And as you rightly said, there is tons of skepticism around working with corporations. My background's in corporate venture capitalism, and I've facilitated a lot of deals between startups who bring one thing to the table and corporates who bring a different level of knowledge, efficiency, know how. So I was quite happy to see when you were, I was like, this is great. So good. It can totally work. It takes a long time often to implement, but it can totally work. So, can you tell us about the process and even what enabled you to feel comfortable to move forward and saying yes to this? What due diligence did you do? Personal due diligence did you do?
Yeah, so like I said, we had our eyes more set on a couple West Coast companies. Just because we're not East Coast guys, Purdue doesn't have the footprint out here that we kind of grew up with, and a lot of Northeast people will know Purdue. Maybe they'll have a good or a bad impression. I don't really know. It depends who you are. But when you talk about checking your ego at the door, it's one thing for us as these backyard farmers to kind of check our ego and go, okay, maybe, the big guys do have something to offer. Whole nother thing for, a large multinational big ag company to check their ego and to approach us and to say, hey, we find what you guys are doing to be pretty interesting. Would you be interested in meeting and having a genuine conversation that says, I think that this is the future. This is Purdue talking. Like, we think this is the future. We see everybody doing it in a fake kind of greenwashing way. We want to do it authentically. We think what you guys are doing is really special. What do you think about working together? So just right there, that was shocking to me that a big company like them would check their ego at the door, come to a little backyard operation. I mean, they've been in a business 100 years, 20,000 plus employees. They've led the way. They were the first to really do large scale organic, first to do large scale, no antibiotics. They acquired Nyman Ranch, which is a really awesome pork company out of the Midwest, and they've stewarded that, I think, really, really well. So the more we got to know them, super, super skeptical in the beginning. I'm sure they were too, but they approached it with that humility that I was like, oh my God, it was a shocking amount of humility, in my opinion, that I found really like inviting and enticing. And so we had several meetings with them, got to know their executive team um, slowly, right? Like the skepticism sort of wanes into this like hopeful optimism, I guess. And they produced a term sheet and they invested in the business in 2018, maybe early 2019. And then shortly after that, they basically said, look, we get it. Like, we see it. There's going to be these economies of scale. You guys need processing, you need chicks, you need feed, you need logistics, you need capital. We've got that stuff. You guys have this really cool, unique way of raising birds that we think is the future. And you tell a great story, you built a really good brand. Like, let's just do this. Let's just call it, let's just make it a marriage. And so they acquired the business in 2019, but retained all the people. And so my whole team's still working there to this day. And this is, almost 5 years later.
Do you
And
operate as your own innovation division almost, or
we
X
do.
division, or a fully
Yep.
separate entity, or how did you merge the cultures? Okay.
Yeah. Division within the bigger company. So we roll up inside of another segment. It's been a real learning process. I mean, the thing that you said takes a long time. to get these
Yes.
things integrated and get them working right. The key for us was we had a really, really black and white. This is what pasture raised is. This is what it is not. And so the temptation, a lot of people would think the temptation would be you buy the brand, you start sort of cheating on standards, and pretty soon you're doing what everybody else does. I mean, I don't know about other companies that don't have experience with other big ag companies, but I can tell you within Purdue, they felt like that was the secret sauce and the magic. And our standards have only increased since being with them. We've codified, we've put out USDA papers on what is pasture raised, where before we are just sort of doing it. Now we're holding ourselves and we have other people holding us accountable to what that is, moving the birds every single day, having them on a clock like that, segregating them in the plant, making sure there's no crossover between, free range chicken to a pasture raised chicken. But it's really been stewarded really well. And it's allowed us to hit a price point that independently, like we would have never been able to touch.
Yeah. And if the goal is, again, as many pasture raised birds as possible, why wouldn't you? It'd be crazy not to. It'd be more harmful not to. I also think that I want to point out the integrity. I've heard you spoken about this before, that in doing this, like Purdue's a huge company. They could have come and seen your farm and studied it and then, walked away and developed their own
Totally.
IP. And I know that they didn't. So that's huge. But even what comes up for me listening to you is that it's all about what does success look like. And that's where vision is really important of what are we measuring? What matters? If it is profit, then you're going to design a business for it. If it is as many birds as possible living this way, then all the engineers and everyone else is going to focus on how do we make that possible. So it's all about the big vision and the goal you set because that's going to influence every single decision that comes underneath. I'm wondering how you aligned your vision and values together, even post integration process, because it's work that never ends. And again, your values iteration, I'm sure even now as a VP, as a leader, it's a question of how do you keep reinforcing this is pasture raised, this is what it is, this is what it isn't. Maybe you have other values as well that have been really key, but how have you led that integration?
Yeah, I mean, there's a like deep appreciation for it within the company. It sounds dumb, but it's why I do things like I have this as my Zoom background because I want every time people talk to me, I want to remind them like this is what we're about. It can get really easy in the corporate environment to just be on PowerPoints all the time and Zoom calls, and it's like you start talking about these animals like they're widgets or just like another thing you're selling. It's like no, no, no. Like let's reconnect. This live piece is so important. Purdue has a deep, kind of profound respect for animal welfare. They've led the animal welfare summit the last several years. Like they really pushed the bar with animal welfare, which I think aligns really well with what we're doing. They obviously maintain a really healthy, like free range program, no antibiotics ever program as well. So that's not they're not the ones that are going to say, hey, pasture is the only way to do it. But it's let's provide the consumer with real options. Let's be transparent about it and let them decide how they want to spend their money. I mean, they've got organic, free range, NAE, no antibiotics ever, pasture raised. They have pork, they have beef. They've got a lot of different things going on. And I think it's fun to see them really stand behind all those things and be proud of all those things. And I think that's possible when you're transparent and you're being honest about it to the customer.
Just related to the future and what's next, I've also heard you talk about how important it is for us to think of the value of what pasture raised does. For instance, you had a model for quite a bit of time where you could not afford the land to raise more birds. So you had to put birds on it or lease the land, therefore regenerating land that was completely dead, a huge service because it makes it fertile again. But that isn't necessarily something you get paid for. That isn't how the world works currently. At the same time, we talked a little bit earlier about the idea of the plant and the animal integration. And I know we discussed that part of your business model is selling the birds, the IP, but I imagine there's something too about getting these units on more farmers' lands or just enabling more people to also set up similar operations. Can you talk to us a little bit about the future from the perspective of getting more land regenerated through this method?
Yeah, so the first one around value is something I'm really like studying pretty hard right now. In the public markets, in the stock market, it's all about value. That's how you drive market cap. It's not just about short-term profitability. That's got an impact on overall value. But in this lease model, so think about 50% of farmlands today are leased. It's a very extractive model if you think about it. All you're trying to do is get the most profit you can off of that land, and then you don't really care how you return it back to the landowner. That's a weird model. In the public markets, we reward overall value or long-term value or market cap. And I think trying to realign farm finance, especially regenerative farm finance, with this idea of building long-term value, that's going to be a big unlock. It's going to be really interesting, especially with like what's happening with tokenization and some of the kind of like highly liquid ability to trade shares in smaller LLCs and smaller companies. I think that there's going to be a really cool opportunity emerge for retail investors, commercial kind of industrial investors to own pieces of actual farmland and participate in the appreciation of value. Once we get that, regenerative is going to make a lot of sense. Right now, the tie-in to stewarding land really well is just that it's beautiful and you can produce nutrient-dense food, and like that's nice, but a lot of people don't care that much. You're not really getting paid for the ecosystem services that you're providing. If we can get to a more of a public markets kind of value-based market cap system on land, all of a sudden good stewardship is rewarded financially, and then I think you'll see like large scale adoption happen really fast. So that's something we're studying on our home farm and just like really thinking hard about, especially with tokenization. I think it's going to unlock a lot of that on sort of like expansion opportunities within Pasturebird. The demand has been really incredible. So we're in Sprouts almost nationwide. We have a lot of retailers in California as well. The response has been huge, and thank God. And this is actually where it's not just about the practices and about like the story. I mean, it comes back to brand is equally important to all this. So it's about building a high powered brand that can tell the story on shelf. You don't always get the, e-commerce kind of like storytelling time. Like you got to convince people in 5 seconds or less to pick up this product and check it out. And that's a new world for us. And it's been a lot of fun. We've been in it for about a year now, developed a really beautiful packaging and tray pack and like starting to play in that world as well. I think it's as important as regenerative practices when it comes to like scaling regenerative is telling the story and getting the brand out into the world. All the certification, I shouldn't say I'm anti-certification. I just think they're very limiting to saying like regen certification or these different things. To me, the brand has the most power to tell that story, and to stand for something really different. And consumers are interested in stories, not more stickers, So you start to see a
Yeah.
million certifications and label claims and attributes, and it's like exhausting and people don't know what they mean. But when you tell a good heartfelt story on pack, I think it goes a long way. So the demand is really good. For us, it's about adding acreage and arcs. Arc is the automated range coop, the 6,000 bird system that we invented. And it's literally a linear thing of scaling that now and putting it into more retail doors. So we're in the like execution phase now. The ideation is done. The groundwork is set. The foundation's there with Purdue. Now it's just about executing and adding zeros.
So there's a possibility a farmer could one day say, I want an ARC. I want one of these automated range coops on my land. And then they integrate that with what other animals they have in their system, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I don't want you to have one. I mean, we want people taking like 10.
Love it.
Um, we need
Package deal.
large scale solutions for large scale problems. Every arc needs about 10 to 15 acres of land if you're going to be in a regenerative state. So we want people doing these on 100, 200 acre plots minimum. Otherwise, it just doesn't make a lot of sense for all the other large scale logistics that go into it.
The other thing I want to highlight or just bring up is that you've had such a myriad of experiences in this space from farming yourself to now growing and scaling a technology company, hardware, kind of software
Yeah.
vibe. And we mentioned before how important it is to just like, we're here for the long term game. This is long term value. It is not a short term thing. You will burn out and exhaust yourself if you play that game. We want to be playing long term.
Hmm.
So, another big issue in this industry is that so often farmers don't really catch a break. So, whether that's financially or no vacation or just very hard work, backbreaking work, how have you balanced that or seen that in terms of lifestyle? Because I think you have 4 kids. You're seemingly very close to your family from what I've observed. So, what do you think that looks like from the future of, I want to call it a livelihood perspective of being able to have a great life as a farmer? And
Yeah.
I almost want to tie in that patriotism vibe again because it is such an important community service that we all need for people in the planet.
For sure. I mean, it happens all the time where you get into it to spend more time with your kids and more time with your family, and then pretty soon you're like even less time that you were working as an accountant or doing something else. But I hate to call it an exit because I really don't see it as an exit. I think of it as a strategic partnership that did afford us some cash. So like it gave my family some capital to go and put up our own, where I'm sitting on right now on a regenerative orchard that's really family based and family focused. My kids are out playing, on the acreage right now, and that capital has allowed us the freedom to do things that when we were really cash tight, we just didn't have. Another thing that's been really important to my wife and I has just been traveling with the kids. So probably visited 40 countries in the last 10 years. We'd always bring our kids on all of our trips. As much as anything, it's about perspective and just family building memories. But I think most of our best ideas have been kind of cultivated in these overseas environments when you can look at the world through a different lens and see that we're not the only ones here, and like there's lots of cool stuff happening everywhere. This is not a Temecula or California US centric thing. There's beautiful solutions being created all over the world, and I think travel's been like totally paramount for us being able
Yes.
to craft these cool solutions to problems.
100%. And I mentioned to you before Top 50 Farmers, which is scaling regenerative agriculture in Europe by spotlighting different role models who are doing just that. They're showcasing how can you run a business in a different way that makes sense? How can you have the lifestyle you want where you can still travel and run a farm and make that work for you if that's the kind of thing you want to do, whatever it might be. But we do need more stories because stories make it feel it's possible and they see
Mhm.
change. That's also why I run this podcast. When you hear someone's story like yours, then you go, okay, it can be done. I could do it too. If he can do it, I can do it. He's not that different than me. You know,
Yep,
it just
exactly.
makes everything feel more possible and true. And it is what brings us closer to our food system after all by rebuilding that connection to the producer, to the land, knowing where your food comes from and everything else. So, I would now like to ask you the last four questions that everyone gets asked. The first one is, what is your vision for the future of food in general?
Yeah, I mean, I hinted at it already, but I really believe that the future is the past. So it's this idea that plants feed animals and animals feed plants, at least here in the US, and I know in a lot of parts of Europe as well. Plant and animal ag has been so separated into their different silos, and it's actually really sad. What plants need is what animals have, and vice versa. And so I think that the reintegration of large scale plants and animals together will be this massive unlock. Yes, there's issues. Yes, there's scalability stuff. I'm really hoping that all these geniuses that went to work for, and I mean that genuinely, it's not a slight, but the really, really smart people that went to work for the plant-based food craze that happened over the last few years, we need them to come back and like work on animal things. We've got huge, insane kind of golden era opportunities for large scale animal production that's actually good for the environment. And we want those people. We need the best and the brightest to be thinking of solutions there. And then I also think it's a return to our roots, actually, with healthy models for like smaller scale, more localized, kind of family friendly farms. So we're working on this really cool membership based UPIC orchard right now. And I think that there's going to be paths for large scale plant animal and then also these more healthy models for smaller scale regenerative ag projects as well.
Hmm. What do you think we're missing to get there and to make that future a reality?
One is just the mindset. I mean, we talked a little bit about like, I think so many smart people came out of college and they saw plant-based or cell-based as beautiful. Like, let's go revolutionize the world. Like, we know all these problems with industrial farming and factory farming and antibiotic use. And it's like, here's a solution. Like, let's go drill in and fix it. And it's like, well, maybe that wasn't all it was cracked up to be. I think there's still some potential there, but it wasn't everything that we thought it was. And I think what we need talent into animal ag. It's not the space for, the bozos and like the people that are just like looking to mail it in. Like we need super bright people coming up with solutions in animal ag. It's also, we talked a little bit too about the finance and the capital structure to fund creative, innovative projects. It's typically not the farmer that's at his wits end, like barely paying the mortgage, that has the ability to go do innovative projects. In a certain way, yeah, but in a certain way, it limits you when you don't have capital to spend on projects. And so I think figuring out farm finance structures that allow for innovation, reward the investors with an appropriate return for the risk profile that's there. Like I think all that's going to really play to fixing all this stuff.
Yes, and yes. I want to say that I love what you said about the past is the future. I didn't tell you this, but I often deliver keynotes on the future food revolution and what does the future of food look like? Also based on all of these interviews I've done asking thought leaders, where are we going? What's happening? And many times I highlight that tech isn't going to save us. It's not going to get us where we need to go. And I include Pasturebird as a great
Oh, that's
example
cool.
of it's not just you have a tech element, it's new, it's innovating on an old method, but it's bringing it up to the modern day and age. And it's also looking at what are the values, what's the culture, what's the things that matter, like the why behind why are we building it in this way and why we're doing it. And that's so key in innovation and thinking about where we're building our businesses and what we're moving into next, because we have to be connected to what is that future we're creating.
Mhm.
Otherwise, we're going to make decisions we're not going to agree with in the long run. So now you know you've been spoken to in front
I
of many
love it.
more hundreds of thousands of people.
We
I
call
forgot
it
to tell you that.
biomimicry technology. So it is. I mean, tech's not going to
Yeah,
save us, but biomimicry tech is the big wave that I think is coming in healthcare too. And it's about like
100%.
instead of trying to force nature into our little box, like let's actually embrace nature, look at nature. It's a pretty dang smart design if you look at it, even if we don't understand exactly why. Try to build systems that actually look more like nature using tech. Like we're not against tech by any means. We're all for it, just
Mm-hmm.
appropriate tech.
Yes. And that whole system approach, I love that you're call it biomimicry tech. I think that needs to be the next vertical all the investors listening to are in. They're all very focused on biodiversity right now. Biomimicry is next. Calling it
There you
now.
go. There you go.
What collaborations are you looking for? So we have listeners from all over. What support help do you need? What can people do to support this mission?
Yeah, I mean, the cool thing is we have a retail product in the market. So like the most basic one is obviously buy our chicken. Like when you see it in the store, you go online, you can go to pasturebird.com. You can go to primalpastures.com. You can, but that's like how we pay the bills to do this really cool ecological work and the kind of revolutionary work that we're doing. But way beyond that, I mean, I think it's much more around like you will help me by using my story and applying it to your own vertical. There is literally, I mean, there's infinite verticals to take this idea of like looking at a problem and finding a biomimicry kind of solution for it. I mean, you could look at just in the chicken space, there's the feed, the logistics, the hatchery, the slaughtering. Like there's room for improvement literally
Yeah.
everywhere. And we need really smart, talented people looking at every single part of this. And that's just for chicken. Like imagine all the different crops and animals that are grown for consumption, food and fiber. It's endless. Like the possibilities are absolutely endless. And not to sound weird, but there's a lot of money to be made for operators and investors in this golden age of kind of the resurgence of animal ag through this new lens of regenerative ag too. So I think that there's plenty of money to be made. There's plenty of important work to be done, and it's going to be really fun to see what the next decade looks like.
Yes. Couldn't agree more. I will add that your team was very kind to provide our listeners with a discount code of 10% if they're willing to in the US and want to try the chicken. It's only in the US right now, but that is available in the newsletter if you are wanting to try Pasturebird. And my last question is always if someone wants to get in touch, if they have a collaboration or something else they want to offer, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you or your team?
Yeah, I mean, we're just pasturebird.com. I do most of my writing on LinkedIn. If you want to see like my kind of thought of the week or whatever, I do a lot of writing there. Another resource that I'll give people, I think it's mostly US based, but we have some Western Europe at least, is getrealchicken.com. I really like
Mm,
that resource because it's a local directory where you can go and find somebody that's smaller and more local to you. And I really do. This large scale sort of like regenerate, it's really important to me, but it's also near and dear to my heart to make sure that we have a healthy kind of small farm ecosystem. So do go check Get Real Chicken before you buy pasturebird.com and see if there's somebody in your backyard that you could go support, because I think that's even more powerful. If you don't have that, we're more than happy to sell you, sell you our chicken and stuff like that. But check out Get Real Chicken because there might be somebody who's small and local, kind of family based, right in your backyard that you'll have a huge impact by supporting somebody like that.
love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on, for sharing your story, for being with us, and for continuing to just do the thing, to continuously pursue your vision. That's the game.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
All right, that's all for today. What did you think of this episode? If anything landed for you, gave you an aha moment, shifted your perspective, really connected with you, please send me a message on Instagram and let me know. My handle is at analisa.winther. I love to hear from you and I answer all of my messages. If you're curious about how we can work together, I'm currently accepting clients in my executive leadership coaching practice. If you're a founder, corporate exec, or an investor working on food system transformation and you've been looking for a coach, go ahead and book a chemistry call with me and we'll explore what that kind of relationship could look like for you and how it could be supportive. If you're hosting an event in the coming months or looking for someone to come and speak to your organization, I do keynotes on the Future Food Revolution, which really is an inspiring and energizing executive summary of what our future food system is going to look like. I also speak about what it means to be a visionary leader in this space, as well as how you can do aligned fundraising. So this is really for startups and looking at how you can raise millions of dollars from investors and funders that are aligned with your vision and values. And this is so key for building a strong company in the long run. Super foundational work. And lastly, if you're a corporation or you're an investor and you're curious to learn more about how we can work together in my business matchmaking services, check out AnalisaWinther.com. See you next time.